So what does that world look like when your agent is emailing my agent and my agent is emailing your agent? And when does the world implode in that scenario?
It already has.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We are coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day on what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on this show, we talk about some of the most interesting and important stories and trends in the news. John, I almost run out of breath on that intro every week.
It is a lot.
It is a lot.
I'm impressed that you can get through it.
And I remembered, I've got it down cold at this point.
Yes.
Hey, I am still riding the buzz from our Agents of Transformation event, our AI Summit this past Tuesday here in Seattle. John, I can't remember a crowd that was that engaged, that packed, and just...
Yeah, typical Seattle. We had a surge in tickets in the last day and day of, so... We were scrambling, adding seats at the last minute. Yeah, we had over 400 attendees. It was great crowd.
I have to tell you, this for me was an event that was not only about AI, but it was produced on my part from an editorial standpoint with the assistance of AI at a whole new level. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about on the show today was some of my takeaways from the event and some of the things you heard, not only at the event, but also at a dinner that was held afterward. But I wanted to start just by talking a little bit about the process of AI as part of this event for me.
I didn't know you were going to go there.
As a litmus test, as a case study in part for how these kinds of things can help. And I wouldn't say it was agents so much in this case. It was just the structure and the organization of the prep that I did. And from the very beginning on this event, I created a project in my AI LLM of choice, which happens to be Claude, but you could do this in any LLM. And from the moment I started making invites to speakers for this event, I did it in this project. And to me, it was just a demonstration and an illustration of how valuable long-term memory within a specified domain is when you are, as the human, smart enough to give the LLM and the AI that kind of context. Because it just kept paying off over and over again right to the end, because I didn't have to explain everything over and over again. And actually, this was a really great thing that our event organizer did, Molly. She was very good at getting survey responses from attendees as they came in. And you and I were both pretty religious about this. Every time we would have a new conversation, maybe you with a sponsor or me with a prospective speaker or their people, we would go back to that survey, ask for the latest data, and run it through the AI to see what people wanted to learn about. And I don't know, I know I'm a nerd, I know I'm an AI geek, but like for me, just the efficiency of that, I was able to explain after about 3 minutes prep to the people I was talking to exactly who was coming, generally the kinds of titles they had, the companies that they worked for, and precisely what they wanted to know about. And I got to tell you, John, it directed the questions. It reoriented my entire approach to the event. And it became clear through this process that people wanted just real takeaways. They really did not want even inspiration necessarily. They wanted practical insights into how these things work.
Yeah, and I was doing much the same thing as you mentioned as it related to sponsor questions that came in, or we hosted a VIP dinner that evening with a group of about 15 to 20 startup founders. And I did the same thing on prepping. Now, I had a different experience. You were using Claude. I typically use ChatGPT, and I fluctuate between ChatGPT and Gemini. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try Gemini for my questions and my prep for this dinner because I help facilitate the conversation. And I didn't really like the questions I got back from Gemini. They were too verbose and a bit too much in the weeds. But I did the same thing. I fed the entire guest list. I said, here's the type of people that are coming. Here's the theme and the topic. Here are some of the general ideas on what we want to discuss. Spit out 10, 15 questions for me. But again, I didn't like Gemini's results right off the bat. So I took all that data, then I put that into ChatGPT, which I historically use on these dinners, and I got much tighter, cleaner questions. And I didn't necessarily use a lot of them. I used a couple of them, but you know how these conversations go, you're pivoting. But it just, having the questions themselves gives you a level of comfort and puts you in a place where you can talk confidently about the subject. I must say, I took your questions from some of your interviews in your prep doc, and I put those into my doc as well, just to say, okay, well, because your questions were informed largely based on the responses of the survey. And so I assumed that a portion of our audience at the VIP dinner who are startup founders would also be interested in those same types of questions. And there was some interesting overlap.
For me, the big takeaway from all of it is that you've got to be smart and informed about how you engage with the AI. It's not a magic button. And I think that really is the difference between somebody who's used it heavily and experienced it and somebody who hasn't. If you haven't really engaged with it on a deep level, then you tend to think that you can just say the magic words and the magic outcome will be produced. And that's not the way it works. And to me, it is very much a thought partner. It is like that person sitting over in the chair next to me who I can bounce ideas off of. And that's really how I took it with this whole process. And for me, we've been doing events, as we said at the very beginning, for 15 years. And it's not something that comes natural to me, even though it is an extension of our journalism. It's something that I have to really work at. And this time, for the first time, I was able to work so much smarter and so much more effectively because the tools were there to assist me. And just at the tail end, I was starting to use Claude Cowork and starting to use it to organize some of my thinking and files. And I'm still just in the process of exploring that. But I feel like I'm right in the bridge between generative AI and agentic AI. And one of the key takeaways is that, the world is over that bridge, at least in terms of the tech world. And
the tech, based on the conference, the tech world is definitely over that bridge. I don't think we're there yet, but fast approaching.
True. I'm getting there, though. I feel like maybe even tomorrow I might
Tomorrow
say,
you're there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, based on all the learnings we got from the conference, we should be in a position to get over that bridge.
Okay, so let's talk about some of our key takeaways from our actual speakers as we look into this world of agentic AI from the GeekWire AI Summit, Agents of Transformation this past week. We'll do that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop and John Cook. We're still sort of riding the high from our big event this week. Thanks to everybody who came out. Thanks to Accenture for sponsoring the event and our Agents of Transformation series. John, let's hear your takeaways first. I want to get to your thoughts and like the big picture stuff.
I'm just going to go kind of scattershot and throw some random thoughts out there, and you can piggyback on these in any way you'd like. But I mean, there were a lot of takeaways, which is good for an event like this. Like I walked out with a lot of thoughts. And I must say, I both attended the main event, which was the half-day summit, which was the public live event, and a lot of my thoughts were also informed by the dinner that I mentioned that we hosted with founders later in the evening. So one is, and this came up in Charles Lamanna's talk, Fireside Chat, that you hosted with him.
Charles Lamanna is the executive vice president at Microsoft, who's involved in their industry co-pilot and business applications.
But I want to just talk about cost of all this.
Interesting.
This came up over and over, both at the startup dinner and in Charles' talk. And cost as it related, I thought it was really interesting that Charles brought up the example, and he wrote a story about this, about the importance of tokens. And now the idea that you can, an engineer who's coming into a new tech company wants a certain budget of AI tokens that they know that they're going to be able to use. And he made the comparison. It's like 15, 20 years ago, you had to, when you came into a company, you had to have email, you had to have a mobile phone, you had to have these certain things. But now tokens are becoming extremely important.
The analogy I make is like, imagine if you showed up to work and they were like, oh, you don't get a mouse. No mouse, just a keyboard. You'd be like, that's weird. And they're like, oh yeah, and by the way, no emails and no Teams. Like, you have to go walk to people. Or you can fax. You'd be like, what the heck is this company? You would not stay around. We are basically at that point for coding. If you hire an engineer that has lived this way of agentic coding, and you told them your token budget per day is $1, they'll be like, see ya. Like they just know they're going to fall so far behind.
And this also came up in the dinner that we hosted. Is a lot of these startup companies are being bankrolled with tokens from the large hyperscalers,
Like
right?
as credits.
As credits.
Yes.
But they're not really accounting for them. And they're not really tracking it. And it's essentially free money that's subsidizing these startups. Well, as soon as these larger AI companies want to start monetizing, do these credits go away? And what does that mean to the bottom line for these startup companies that are it reminds me of the Uber days, when Uber was essentially subsidizing the rides for many people. They were giving, and now you take an Uber in Seattle. I mean, no one can really afford an Uber in Seattle anymore, right? Because they're no longer subsidizing it. It seems like the same thing. There was one startup founder who will remain nameless, who brought up one of his engineers at his company over a weekend used $5,000 worth of AI tokens.
To do what?
He was vibe coding. I don't know what he was doing, but he was using up company resources over the weekend, and they obviously had to put a stop to that and say, because when you add that up, you add that up over 200 plus working days, it's over $1 million that this one person could be spending, right? Just in their AI usage. And so this cost issue is really interesting to me because I think it affects, there's so much tied up in it. It's the business models of the large AI companies. It's the startup companies that are being subsidized. It's employees who need the credits to do their jobs more effectively, to power their agent workforce that they're in charge of. It's fascinating to me.
The counter argument to that, and you brought this up as well, is that there's the potential for the AI systems to get more and more efficient over time, especially as the model training becomes more efficient. They come up with new kinds of approaches. So that is a potential counterbalance to that.
Yeah, and you did see this with the cloud, right? Cloud costs came down tremendously as companies started shifting to the cloud. So there is some historical precedent there, and that may indeed occur. Now, the other interesting component about this cost discussion is that, we had our startup zone. So we had a pitch competition, and we had 4 really interesting startups come up on stage, pitch to our great panel of judges, T.A. McCann of PSL, Brian Hale from Anthos Capital, and Yifan Zhang from AI2 Incubator. The winner of the startup zone competition was a company called PayEye, a Seattle area startup, which their business model is essentially this.
Yes.
Helping companies track their spend and knowing where they're putting their dollars in this new AI ecosystem. And I got to say, David Tepper, the CEO of the company, what'd you think of the pitch?
Oh, he was great.
Oh, he nailed it.
Not only the pitch, but he also did a great job answering the questions from the judges, which were very tough.
Very tough. And he nailed it.
Let's listen to a clip from his pitch now.
There seems to be a new model or a new tool or a technique that comes out every single day, and PayEye is the only system that is a horizontal platform across your organization that makes sure that you're maximizing its impact. We tell you exactly how much you're spending and on what. We do the boring things like interdepartmental chargeback. We interdict rogue agents before they blow your budget. And we quantify the value back to your business using a host of proprietary techniques. And then we give you a whole bunch of tools to manage it across adherence to your business KPIs, cost, failures, impactful performance metrics, and even capacity management.
So that was David Tepper, the CEO of PayEye, P-A-Y-I. Very clever company name.
Well, Todd, what do you think about this whole cost? I know we've gone deep on just like kind of the business model and cost, and we weren't spending as much time right off the bat on the technical aspects of this whole discussion, which is probably where your mind goes.
Totally.
Mine goes more to the business model and how people are going to make money on this.
Yes.
But Where do you come down on
Well,
this?
it's interesting because this also came up in my conversation with Vijay Raji at the end of the event. He's the CTO of applications for OpenAI. He was actually on the podcast a couple weeks ago when we were over at the Bellevue office of OpenAI, you and I. But I asked him about ads in ChatGPT because, of course, many folks out there have seen the Super Bowl commercials that Anthropic put out, and those were a bit of a red herring and almost unfair in some ways, that Anthropic suggested that ChatGPT would actually be responding in the voice of kind of a sponsor that would put something into the thread. And Vijay explained that really wasn't the case, that it's basically an ad to the side of the chat in a free version of ChatGPT, and it is only available on the free tier. But to me, this gets to this fundamental question of the economics, because you're reaching the point where the large language model providers, these big companies that are training these frontier models and spending tens of billions of dollars doing it, at some point they're going to need to recoup some of that investment. And who's that going to come from? It's going to come from potentially the companies that they're giving the credits to now, right?
Or you and me who have to watch the ads.
Yes, exactly.
But this is interesting because it ties into another big story of the week, the cost discussion, and it ties into OpenAI.
Yes.
OpenAI this week announced they're shutting down Sora,
Yes.
their AI video generation platform. This was a shock because they just launched it.
And they had some billion-dollar deal with Disney,
Yes,
right?
and but to me, it shows wow, processing all of the video content in AI is expensive. And if you don't have a revenue model, and maybe this points to the fact that OpenAI is streamlining operations because maybe they're getting ready to go for an IPO
Yes.
and they got to get their house in order a little bit more. But boy, I mean, just the fact that they're turning off Sora a few months after they launched the thing, and I don't think they came out and said this publicly, but a lot of the speculation is that it's just the cost associated with this.
So I've got a little piece of trivia for you here. You mentioned earlier the startup developer who spent $5,000 in a weekend, and how if you added up $5,000 over 200 working days, it would get up to $1 million. Well, here's a different scale for you. I just looked this up. OpenAI's Sora, the investment to do all that processing, roughly $15 million a day, or more than $5 billion annually. So
Just on Sora.
just on Sora. So right there you have it. I mean, this is where it starts to feel like a bit of a bubble.
Well, they're shutting it down, so maybe they're making the practical business
Right.
decision. A bubble, they would keep funneling money in it endlessly. So maybe they are being disciplined in how they're thinking about their business.
I think you're absolutely right, though. You've got OpenAI headed toward an IPO. They've made some preliminary filings already, and I think they want to be able to defend their P&L, their profit and loss statement, when it comes time to face up to Wall Street.
And at the end of the day, OpenAI, it's still a startup. I mean, it's a heavily funded startup, but it is still a startup. Well, when you think about Google, has the door been left open for them? Because they have not endless amounts of money, but a lot more than OpenAI. And they've got their video service, Veo, which maybe they're just salivating with this opportunity that one of their main competitors is going away, at least temporarily, so they can focus on this.
Not to start having the monopoly discussion, but this is where the likes of Microsoft and Google, with these established franchises that are basically cash cows at this point, even if they're not growing, things like Windows and Microsoft 365 or Google search business, they can fund these big bets in ways that OpenAI and Anthropic have to fund through outside capital versus internal revenue. And that's a very different thing. Google and Microsoft are actually in positions of strength here because of their legacy businesses in ways that Anthropic and OpenAI are not. So that is something that would be interesting to try in a court of law.
Yes. Well, we went down a rabbit hole.
Yes.
Just like on one takeaway
Yes.
here. I mean, there were probably 30 others, so this is not going to be a 3-hour podcast.
Yes.
What about you? Any other takeaways that you had?
Yeah, I was really struck in both the conversations with Vijay Raji and Charles Lamanna and to a certain extent Deepak Singh of AWS, about how basically everyone is a builder. And that was the phrase that Vijay used at one point. As an example, Vijay built a personal Slack and email summarizer for himself, running locally, no cloud, so no real security issues. And he did this in an afternoon on Codex, the OpenAI software development system.
But what's happening on the AI side of things, especially in coding, is pretty wild. So I'm probably preaching the choir here, where I'm now able to take Codex and then ask Codex to summarize all my Slack messages, all my emails, and everything else that's coming in between on a 15-minute basis. So it's like running through all of this stuff, summarizing using LLM, and then giving me a digest. And that's something that I coded up using Codex. All it's just like basically a vibe coding prompted, and to the point where I think I'm very happy with the outcome. So I'm going to keep running this as a separate standalone app. But that's not it. And like every time I come up with a new idea, instead of like asking to go to a team and then pitching the idea and asking someone to like code it up for me, I first start a prototype. And the prototype is with Codex. And this is what I was talking about. Like when Codex is running on your laptop, you don't want to shut it down because you don't want that session to end. So you kind of like keep it slightly propped open in meetings. And this has become the norm across OpenAI. People come to meetings, right before they start the meeting, they send a prompt out and they keep the laptop lid slightly open. And the meeting ends and you go back and see what is cooked up. And now with like sub-agents and multiple agents, this is just like, parallelized so much.
And he's not making this app to sell to other people. He's making this app to use himself. And that is really where it seems application development is going. And so one of my questions was, well, wait, where does that leave the actual application developers, like the professional developers? It puts them much more at the platform level in many ways. And it opens up kind of this wild west of application development where everybody's doing it, scratching their own itch. And it raises all sorts of interesting opportunities to solve problems. And it raises all sorts of challenges in terms of governance, security, and especially in a corporate environment, like what in the heck are you exposing yourself to as these vibe-coded apps become popular among your workforce?
Yeah, and do people become really siloed in their own tools and systems they're using versus a platform that goes across the organization where everybody's working in a more unified manner?
Another point for me that I was thinking a lot about going into this conference, and that was only reinforced by what the speakers had to say, was this notion that software engineering is effectively so far at the front edge of these trends that what developers are doing today is what the rest of us will be doing in 3 to 6 months. And one thing that Charles...
Or 3 to 6 years, depending upon the industry.
Well, depending on the industry, but at least the rest of us will have the potential to do. And just as a couple examples, Charles Lamanna was saying that they have product lines where no human writes a single line of code. Engineers do the spec review, system design, agent supervision, but not the raw coding. He said one team saw 40% faster app load times, 25% fewer support tickets. They have smaller teams, more senior roles, fewer PMs. But one of the points he made was that even though teams themselves are smaller, he thinks the organizations will be as big or bigger, just comprised of smaller teams.
And this leads to this idea, and this was also something we discussed at the dinner, was, okay, now you can create all these new products, you can push the code out faster and develop them so much faster. But there are potential bottlenecks ahead because once you can develop and create a product as fast as you can, but if you don't have the infrastructure around that or the sales infrastructure around it, you can't really do much with it, which there was an interesting point with one of the startup founders I spoke to who said they were trying to come at this problem by kind of building out the sales function first and then going to the engineers and saying, all right, now build this product really quickly and roll it out in 48 hours. So that they have the marketing and sales infrastructure around it.
Like human infrastructure?
Yes, largely, yeah.
And then saying to the developers, hey, now we have the people in place who can sell this thing.
Who can sell this, yeah.
So now go do
Now
your
go
thing.
do it, right.
Interesting.
It flips it on its head a little bit as part of that, and it speaks into the whole hiring, because I think we also, as a key takeaway, is that you do see maybe the more senior members of a team that are able to use these tools and their jobs are kind of safe. The people in the middle are not really that safe, and you're seeing a lot of layoffs as a result of that. But another interesting trend that I think both Charles hit on, as well as VJ and Julia White, the Chief Marketing Officer at Amazon Web Services, was this idea of hiring an entirely new breed of workers that are AI native, that don't have the baggage of the last 10 or 15 or 20 years of doing things. And so I know there's a lot of angst right now about people graduating from college and coming into the workforce, but there was a little ray of hope there that if you do come into the workforce and you know how to use these tools and you don't have all this existing baggage of how things were done in a certain way. In fact, Julia White, the CMO at AWS, was saying, I, as a marketer of 20 plus years, have had to unlearn a lot of things. That's what I'm going through as a marketer, is unlearning things. So if you can get a workforce that comes in that's more AI native, these companies are paying attention to that and are looking at that deeply.
On the panel, which was led by Emily Parkhurst of Formidable Media, did a great job moderating this panel. One of the people was Liat Ben-Zur, and she explained that you have to really think not just about the efficiency, but about the actual things you're measuring. And she cited the example of a developer who might save 5 hours on something.
What are the business metrics that have moved? How do we improve retention? How do we improve revenue? How do we improve NPS? How do we improve usage of, this particular feature? How do we improve how quickly we're getting paid? Whatever it is that you're using AI for, you should have a business target around that, and that's the thing you should measure. Whether you did it with AI or did it with ShmAI, it doesn't really matter. You're trying to move a needle. Keep your eye on the needle and ensure that you're moving that needle. Otherwise, I think we start looking at a lot of metrics that, are watermelon. They look green on the outside, but really it's red on the inside.
And her point was like, big whoop. Who cares? Like, what does that actually do for the business? And you have to have these traditional key performance indicators, traditional KPIs, and keep them in mind and not just be wowed by the sudden wizardry that your employees are wielding.
Another big takeaway that was an undercurrent throughout the event, piggybacking on that, was this idea of focus and focusing on what you need to do within the organization. And I think it was Charles Lamanna who said, if a company comes to me and they say, yeah, we're really successful in AI, we have 250 AI projects going on right now. He's like, that's a red flag. He's like, you should have maybe 3 to 5 and focus on those and make sure that they are providing value back to the entire organization.
Yes. At the very end of the day, I started to have these feelings of, existential angst, especially when VJ was talking about some of the things that he does with his email, and how I think one of the vibe coding apps that he's spun up is reviewing his email and starting to respond. And earlier in the day, Charles got almost an applause line when he explained that he had an agent that literally declined 17 meetings for him. And part of my thing is where does this all end up? Are our agents going to be sending email to our agents, and it's just going to be this giant free-for-all like Moltbook, where you have basically the agentic social network? By the way, I loved this conference in part because people were coming up to me in the breaks and going, why didn't you ask about Moltbook? And so it was great because then when I got to VJ, I was like, oh, and I should have brought this up earlier with Charles and with Deepak. What do you think about agent-to-agent technology?
It's like how when you first sit in a autonomous driving vehicle, you're not going to feel comfortable, but then 10 rides later, you're just letting it ride.
Okay, yes, but Waymo drives the speed limit. Agents go 1,000,000 times faster than humans who are writing emails. So what does that world look like when your agent is emailing my agent and my agent is emailing your agent? And when does the world implode in that scenario?
It already has. You're all aware of Moltbook, right? Where there are a
Yes.
bunch of agents with their social. I mean, we have run those experiments, and it's actually fascinating to see the kinds of content that it's generating. And like every time we try something new, that's the start of it, and then it's going to get even better. And so, yes, I am excited, just as you are, to look at this world.
Yeah, that becomes kind of a scary world in some ways. And I think that was another theme that we heard, is that acknowledge the fear of AI. That's part. There were several kind of leadership lessons for the AI era that were weaved into the conversation too, which I enjoyed and appreciated. And I think that was one that I took away. It was this idea that people don't know what's happening, and that's scary. And so as a leader, you have to acknowledge the fear that people have, still embrace it and work through it, but knowing that we're not sure where this is going, to your point of like, are we just going to have our agent workforces talking to one another, and what are we all doing out there? So that was another important point.
I will tell you, John, just big picture, I have increasingly been asking myself lately, why am I doing this? This being whatever I happen to be moving my mouse around and typing on these keys to do on my computer.
Well, this was Julia White's point
Yes.
from Amazon Web Services, is like the first step is use the AI to take away the pain points. She had the example where she mentioned there was some like review process that employees had to go through, some Amazon bar raiser type of
Yes.
thing, right? And she said it used to take people like 3 to 4 hours. And with the new AI system, it like eliminated most of the work. I didn't fully understand what it was, but she said that she announced it to the team, like, okay, we're getting rid of this system. Here's the new system. It should take you 30 minutes now.
And spontaneous applause.
That this process that was a real burden in the organization was being obliterated by AI.
Yes. And I joked after that session that like that should be the new metric. Like, does your team burst into
But
spontaneous
you're doing
applause?
this. You're doing this. You're looking at
I'm
all of
asking-
your tasks and seeing what you can automate.
I've gotten really big lately, even in just the past 2 weeks, on going into Claude. I've got a Gmail connector in there hooked into our Google Workspace. I hope this isn't a security risk right here of me acknowledging this on the GeekWire podcast.
Show me how to do this too.
And asking it what emails I've missed. Asking it to review specific labels of emails, because I'm really big on inbound filters to automatically label my email. I always have been. So, for example, John, any newsletter that comes in, any Google alert, anything that's an alert in my mind that I don't really have to read, but I probably should, but there's now hundreds of them coming into my inbox today. I go into Claude. I say, give me a summary of all of the key alerts that match GeekWire's news principles. Happens in Seattle, matters everywhere. You know, the kind of thing that I say on this show. Those are our news principles. That's why we say those things. And I use that as a guideline for the AI to assess the alerts that are in my inbox. And it started just listing the 5 things that I've missed that day. It'll translate into newsletter items, story leads, things to pursue. And otherwise, it's just this big mess of data that I never really have the courage to wade into on a daily basis. It's made a big difference for me. And I understand that there are risks. I understand that there are costs. And I guess I just have a hard time dwelling on those things, because for me, the benefits that I see in terms of my day-to-day, the amount of things I'm getting done, are just immense.
Until the costs go up and the credits go away, then things change.
I'm not using any credits.
I know, but the costs could go up significantly.
Hey, I want to say something, because we could go on for quite a
this
while
has been
on this.
great.
Yeah,
Great event.
Oh.
You did an awesome job on the fireside chats and really enjoyed it.
It was really just a great crowd. It's been a while since I've felt that way at a conference, any conference, not just ours, but just the level of engagement and interest. And I think it speaks to the moment that we're in.
Well, let's do it again.
We should do it again.
Now, we were talking to a few sponsors about like we could actually do this conference about every 4 months, because
Yes.
it's changing that rapidly.
Okay, let me do this just for the GeekWire podcast listeners, the loyal people out there who have listened to us babble for
This
the past,
far.
this
Yeah.
far. Hey, if you even if you didn't go to the event, if you email me, todd@geekwire.com, and tell me and confirm that you've signed up for the GeekWire newsletter, the GeekWire daily newsletter, just as the price of admission, no charge, no charge, the free email newsletter, just confirm. We'll do it on the honor system. I will respond with a link to the page that is otherwise only available to event attendees with all of the videos, full videos from the conference. So if you want to listen to any of the sessions, watch any of the sessions, you'll be able to do that just as a perk of being a GeekWire podcast listener and a GeekWire newsletter subscriber.
That's really nice of you, Todd.
Yeah, real nice.
Really
okay.
nice.
Hey, coming up next, we got a good trivia question.
We do? I didn't think you had one.
I got one this week.
You
Segment
slapped something
3.
together.
I did.
Okay,
I did.
let's do it.
Coming up next, and it has nothing to do with AI. So a little breath of fresh air here.
Pop quiz, hotshot.
This is GeekWire's Trivia Challenge.
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
All right, John, that's right. It is time for the GeekWire Trivia Challenge. And today is a very special day in Seattle, the day that this podcast comes out, March 28th, 2026, because, do you know? This is I'm going to stump you.
No, I think light rail.
Light rail going across the
Opening-
bridge.
Yes. The world's first
light rail
train crossing a floating
bridge. So here
What
is-
could possibly go wrong?
However, we do know, thanks
A lot of
to-
things did go wrong, actually, in
Yes,
the build-up to this,
okay,
because it's very behind schedule.
Well,
So,
and not only
yeah.
that, let's talk about this. So here's this week's trivia question. Big news. Sound Transit's light rail started crossing Lake Washington on a floating bridge today. Okay. It's the first train in the world to do that. So here's the question. The original I-90 floating bridge across Lake Washington opened in what year? What year did the original I-90 floating bridge across Lake Washington open? Is it A, 1928, B, 1940, C, 1955? You're looking at me with a gleam in your eye, John.
I'm waiting.
Yeah. C, 1955, or D, 1970s. So again, A, 1928, B, 1940, C, 1955, or D, 1970.
I'm going to go with D, 1970.
So far off.
And then it's 1955.
So you're wrong again.
It was that far back?
Yes.
I thought it was a more modern structure.
It is, in fact. However, the original Lake Washington floating bridge was built in 1940.
Really?
1940, yes.
Okay.
Yes, in fact, it was the Lacey V. Murrow Memorial Bridge, opened in 1940 as the world's largest floating structure. And you were talking about the trouble that this Sound Transit project has had, over the delays over the years, but that is nothing compared to the trouble that this bridge has had.
It's sunk.
It's sunk.
Yeah. And I know that it has sunk.
It sank during a storm in 1990. They've been doing some sort of pressure washing or something, and they left something exposed. I was just reading up on this. I'm not an expert. I'll link to something like, I'm sure History Link.
Yeah, let's go give a history link.
Yeah, I'm sure they do not.
They're going to be all over this.
They're going to be all over this. So anyway, I'm excited about this. GeekWire reporter Curt Schlosser got a first ride today. We're recording this on Thursday, and he got to go across the lake with Dow Constantine, the Sound Transit chief, and others, and said it was basically just like riding a train on terra firma, on the ground, you know?
Well, I would hope so. I hope it's not like going through the water. Yeah.
Well, you never know. I figured, sometimes you're going over that bridge and it doesn't feel exactly stable. I don't know. Maybe that's just my mind playing tricks on me.
No, if it's windy enough, it does not feel stable.
No.
Yeah.
So, and he actually asked the engineer questions about at what point do you shut the train down because the winds are too high, and Curt got a lot of good details. So I'll link to that.
What do you
story.
think it's going to mean for the
tech,
connection of
yes.
the tech communities between Seattle and the east side cities of Bellevue and Redmond?
I think it's going to change the commute for a lot of workers. I think there's going to be a lot of trial here in the first month or so, by which I mean people are going to be trying it out and seeing if it actually is more convenient than the bus. You talked last week about the Microsoft Connector and the other kinds of shuttles that different companies, including like Expedia and I think to some extent Amazon, do across the lake on the two bridges. And I think it could potentially make it just much more seamless to get from all the way from Redmond to downtown Seattle in minutes, as opposed to 45 minutes to an hour, potentially, depending on traffic. I remember being in the light rail the first time that I went from the University District Station, the University Station, to Pioneer Square, and just kind of being astonished at just how quickly it got there. And I recognize these are things that most modern cities have experienced many, many decades ago, but to experience them in Seattle is something else. How about you? Are you going to write it?
Well, we're kind of in the same area of Seattle,
Yeah,
where this
we're out of luck.
really isn't.
We've had this conversation
Yeah, we
before.
already did this one, but it doesn't really benefit us too much based on where we're located.
Regardless, it is an engineering marvel, and it's right here in our backyard, and that is GeekWire's Trivia Challenge for the week. Once again, the answer was B, 1940.
Nice job. I got stumped.
Absolutely. Okay, that was like the first time, because usually you know.
I think that is the first one I've missed.
Yes. Okay, well, I'll see if I can repeat it next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. And again, thanks to everybody who attended the event this past week. It was really made all that much better for the energy that the people in the crowd brought to the room. So we're appreciative of you and all of our sponsors and all of the speakers as well. And again, just email me at todd@geekwire.com and tell me you've signed up for the newsletter, and you can get a little peek yourself into what that event was like. Thanks for listening. Curt Milton edited this episode. Until next time, I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We'll talk to you next week on the GeekWire podcast.